Welcome back to the Kudlow Report. I'm Larry Kudlow. At the top of this half hour, while all eyes are focused on the potentially catastrophic events in Japan, revolution continues to sweep through the Middle East. These flashpoints spell major uncertainty in the markets, no matter how good they traded today. Just minutes ago, the United Nations Security Council voted for a no-fly zone over Libya. Oil is up in after hours on top of the 3.5% it gained today. It's incredible turmoil almost everywhere. Here now, we welcome back retired U.S. Army General and former NATO Supreme Allied Commander Wesley Clark. Halima Croft coming back. She's Senior Geopolitical Strategist at Barclays, and Jim Iurio, Director at TJM Institutional Services. General Clark, welcome back.
Thank you.
I don't know what it means that the UN wants a no-fly zone. I don't know what that means. I don't know what the American response is. What I do know is that Mr. Gaddafi is now going to go after the rebels in Benghazi, hook, line, and sinker. It could be genocide for all I know. General Clark, can you help us interpret these events?
Well, this gives UN Security Council authorization, and a UN Security Council resolution has the force of international law, authorizing nations to use all necessary means to protect civilians. So it talks about a no-fly zone. It can be taken beyond that into airstrikes, into targets on the ground, and anything that's necessary to protect civilians is the way I'm interpreting this. Now, Gaddafi has played it exactly wrong. He's threatening the international community. And what the international community is probably going to do now is call for an immediate ceasefire in place by Gaddafi's forces. And when he doesn't do that, then I assume that we'll use force. We've spent several days building up those forces, lots of discussion behind the scenes. I would expect there would be some fairly rapid and fairly decisive action against his air forces, and if that doesn't stop, then there'll be other forces brought to play.
Jim Iurio, would you be good enough to try to link what General Clark has just said regarding the UN and a possible scenario with the stock market and the commodity markets, Jim? What are you hearing?
Well, then the oil market is interesting, and that's what really this whole thing about. And what it's even more so about is that the markets are worried. Everything else besides Saudi Arabia is just kind of side dishes. Saudi Arabia is the meat of the discussion, and I think I think the market feels that the UN is trying to get this under control before bad news starts coming out of Saudi Arabia. Now, you said that oil rallied on this news, and I saw that it did. That kind of surprises me a little bit, because in Libya, what we had was clearly a civil war. This, to me, seems like a little bit of a better option if the UN is going in there to stabilize the situation. To me, I'm not sure oil's a buy off this, but a sell. But again, oil stalled out at these levels before. The situation has been deteriorating in the Middle East. The only thing that could drive it up another 10 or 15 bucks is something that comes out of Saudi Arabia. In absence of that, it seems to me that we're getting to a point where we might want to talk about demand destruction a little bit, and maybe that's going to push oil down.
All right, Halima Croft, you've heard Jim Iurio, you heard General Clark. What is your reaction to this? Do you think the oil play is exaggerated? No new oil news. I mean, a lot of a possible military step up in Libya, Halima, but not necessarily any new oil news.
I take a little bit of a different tack on that. I think there had been a little bit of a perception in the markets that if Benghazi had fallen back to Gaddafi, that you could see some situation possibly where you could see production restored. You had some of the European companies basically releasing statements that they were ready to resume production, ready to resume their relations with the Libyan National Oil Company. So I think with the new sort of escalation with the UN, with the new no-fly zone, I think that puts those plans on hold. And so I think what we're looking at is a much more sustained Libyan outage in the markets. And I'm not sure that was actually priced in. And so I think the issue that we need to talk about is the issue, again, of spare capacity. Because if Libya is going to be out for a significant period of time, then we have to look at where the next shoe could drop. And obviously, all attention is on Saudi Arabia. But we still think there's another potential disruption looming with Nigeria in April.
Another disruption with Nigeria in April. Could you just give me a quick 20 seconds on that one?
Sure. In the previous two election cycles in Nigeria, we've had significant supply disruptions. In the 2003 elections, we had 850,000 barrels of Nigerian crude off the market. In the 2007 election cycles, we had 1 million barrels because of attacks on the energy infrastructure. We believe we could see a similar cycle in this election, and just yesterday, we had an attack on an Egypt flow station. So we think we could see another repeat of militant activity there.
Jim Iurio, just quickly, I want to get General Clark back in, but Jim Iurio, real quick, you heard what Halima said. Is that in your model?
Here's the problem I have with that is that the rally in oil today was almost like a euphoric rally along with all the rest of the commodity complex. It wasn't a panic rally like we've seen in the past. And we talked about the no-fly zone thing earlier in the day, too. So I don't think it was an enormous surprise to the market when it happened this evening.
But what about this Nigeria thing?
It's a big issue, but it's still a side dish. Saudi Arabia is still what the market's worried about. I don't know if the market might have it wrong, but that's the headline that's going to drive oil prices up 10, 15 bucks.
All right, General Clark, back to you, sir.
Yes, sir.
From your great experience, how do you think investors should be thinking about all the unknowns in Japan and the radiation threats and all this going on to try to cool down the nuclear reactors? Sir, what's your general thought on that? Because this is, in my humble opinion, still by far the _1 crisis in the world and the #1 factor in the American stock market.
Well, I think this is going to decisively break the deflationary system in Japan, and I think you're going to see an enormous outpouring of real effort in construction and infrastructure repair, and I think it's going to lead, after we get through this, to a prolonged surge in the Japanese economy as a result of all the necessary spending to produce this. Right now, nations are pulling together, businesses are pulling together to figure out the answer on the nuclear plants. There are answers. They will put those answers in place, and so it's a dip. It is a buying situation in my humble opinion.
So this is very interesting. I've not heard you say this before. This is very interesting. You're saying we, the world, and the Japanese people, who are ultimately the ones in the line of fire and danger here, you're saying we will avoid the worst of the nuclear meltdown / radiation spread scenario, and instead we will get on with the business of reconstruction in Japan. That's what you're saying.
I'm saying that. I'm not saying it's not going to get worse tomorrow, but there are technical answers to this. There are construction answers. There are ways to deal with this, and it may take a week. It may take 2 weeks, but I think that, of course, Japan's going to be back and back stronger as a result of dealing with this circumstance.
Jim Urio, if General Wes Clark's view is correct, is that not, I'm going to say it, wildly bullish for stocks? Is that not wildly bullish? If Wes Clark is right, is that not wildly bullish for stocks?
First off, I do hope he's right, and I kind of think he's right in the long term, too. And yes, it's wildly bullish for stocks, but as he alluded to, it's not wildly bullish for stocks tomorrow or at any time within the next week until we get some clarity on the issue. But in the end, it will be bullish for stocks, as will the dovish Fed here and the liquidity that they've given us.
All right, Halima, I want to ask you about General Clark's view. Because, look, I am scared to death. Almost everybody is scared to death, Halima, about the worst-case outcomes and whether these spent nuclear rods can be cooled down so we can avoid the so-called meltdown radiation scenario. Halima, I'm going to give you the last word. Can we rely on what General Clark is saying? Because the unknown is fraught with fear.
I would never bet against General Clark, so I would go with him. But one more thing I would add is the recovery of Japan is going to be energy intensive. Rebuilding is going to be energy intensive, so it'll only be supportive for oil prices as well over the course of the year.
You know what, Halima? I, too, would never bet against General Wesley Clark. I really wouldn't. He's a great man. Thank you ever so much to all of you, General Wes Clark, Halima Croft, and Jim Urio. Appreciate your insights. Now, folks, Tokyo opens up at the top.